So we have a couple of reforms from the progressives that we're going to talk about. The 16th Amendment is a progressive income tax. The more you make, the more they take. That's basically how it is. So that means that the robber barons are going to have to actually pay more taxes than the average little guy in America. We have the 17th Amendment, which we just discussed a couple of videos back. This is to stop the robber barons from controlling the Senate of the United States. So they gave us, with the 17th Amendment, America gave the people the chance to vote on their own senators so that way they would not be appointed by the robber barons. We have the 18th Amendment, which is prohibition of alcohol. You are prohibiting. Prohibiting means to stop doing something. Okay? It's progressive abolitionists thought that if you would ban alcohol, it would end poverty by stopping people from wasting their money on alcohol. All right, here we go. Read Article 1 from the 18th Amendment and answer the question. What problem did reformers of the progressive era believe would be solved by the 18th Amendment? 1 year after the ratification of this article, the manufacture, sale, or transportation of intoxicating liquor within the importation of, therefore, or exportation thereof from the U.S. and all territories subject to the jurisdiction thereof for beverage purposes is hereby prohibited. Now, look, y'all, the leak test, they really like to throw a bunch of extra stuff at you just to see if you'll take the bait, to see if you won't be able to tell the difference. What's the real question? Okay, if we go back up here, what problem did reformers of the progressive era believe would be solved by the 18th Amendment? This is telling you what the 18th Amendment is, and you are expected to know that we're trying to cut out alcohol in order to stop poverty. That is the main thing of it right here, okay? So poverty would be the correct answer. We have the 19th Amendment. The 19th Amendment is how women finally got the right to vote in 1920. Susan B. Anthony was the woman right at the front of this movement. She had been working for almost 50 years at this point to get women the right to vote. She wanted women to have the right to vote and the power to stop employment discrimination. A group of women started protesting for the right to vote. These were called the suffragette movement. Anytime you add "et," that feminizes the word. Suffrage means the right to vote. Suffragette is females' right to vote. So the suffragettes were often arrested at protest rallies and went on hunger strikes in jail to force their release. Okay, so here we go. The progressive movements of economic reform resulted in what? So how are we going to reform the economic system to change it in favor of the people? And that is going to be the 16th Amendment, which says that rich people have to pay more than poor people in taxes. All right, how did hunger strikes help the suffragette movement? Let's see. So they convinced women, no. They brought international attention to the fight for equal rights. That sounds good to me. Persuaded politicians to release female activists from prison. Well, that looks like Let's go back up and read, folks. Suffragettes were often arrested at protest rallies and went on hunger strikes in prison to force their release. So I would say C is the correct answer right here. Okay? All right, moving on. How did African Americans and women receive the right to vote? Well, black men received the right to vote with the 15th Amendment. Remember, the Civil Rights Amendments were 13, 14, 15. Free citizens vote. So 13 is freedom for all black people. 14 is citizenship for everybody except for Native Americans. 15 means that black men get the right to vote. And then women got the right to vote with the 19th Amendment. So that means that, how did they get the right to vote? Well, constitutional amendments were passed. Specifically, we're talking about the 15th and the 19th Amendments. The progressive movement of the early 20th century was least successful on the issue of, let's see, women's rights. They were pretty successful there. Alcohol prohibition, well, that's the 18th Amendment. civil rights for racial minorities, and child labor reform. Well, guys, the civil rights for minorities, for black people mostly, are not going to be addressed again until the 1950s with the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s with Rosa Parks and Dr. King and Malcolm X and 100 other civil rights activists we could talk about. So what else did the progressives want, y'all? A couple of things here. Reform legislation. Secret ballots. Okay? We wanted people to be able to vote in secret without actually telling everybody who they're voting for. We got that. A referendum lets people vote on key legislation. They got that. Recalls. Recalls are very important. If a politician is not doing their job, or if they're involved in a criminal endeavor or something like that, we can actually pull that politician out and fire them. And then we'll have a recall election where we elect a new person. The Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890 was the first effort at restricting big business and stopping them from becoming a fourth branch of the U.S. government. At first, it was not aggressively enforced. In fact, the government used it to prevent unions from using strikes and stop trade. So the Sherman Antitrust Act, for its first 10 years of use, was used against labor unions. That's why labor unions had to have their meetings in secret, because it was illegal. Teddy Roosevelt sued the American Sugar Refining Company with E.C. Knight at its head, which helped to spark its enforcement. So once he sued E.C. Knight and won, then Teddy Roosevelt's going to use the Sherman Antitrust Act as a giant club to beat the robber barons over the head with for the next 10 years. All right, next. What was the purpose of the Sherman Antitrust Act? Well, the original purpose was to oppose monopolies. Okay, so we're trying to break up the monopolies so that way we can restore competition and lower prices. All right, 49, excuse me. The Sherman Antitrust Act was passed in 1890, but initially was not aggressively enforced. Which event sparked enforcement of the Sherman Antitrust Act? And it is going to be the lawsuit against the American Sugar Refining Company and E.C. Knight. Next, we have the Clayton Antitrust Act. Hey, y'all, any antitrust act is going to try to stop monopolies, right? So it outlawed interlocking directories and mergers that created trust companies. So this took it a step farther. There used to be this strategy of every time the government would say you can't do this or can't do that, the robber barons would just figure out a different way to do it, okay? And so one of those was called the interlocking directory, which means that if you have 5 different gas companies, okay, they could have a board of directors on each one of those companies. Well, what happens when you have the same board of directors for all 5 of your different gasoline companies? They basically make it where all 5 companies act as one company, and they make a monopoly there, okay? So the Clayton Antitrust Act of 1914 served to restrain corporations from removing the possibility of competition from the marketplace. Which statement describes an effect of the Sherman Antitrust Act? No, excuse me, Clayton Antitrust Act. Let's see. Here it is. It prevented the formation of new business monopolies, okay? Now, around this time, we have something that's going to help the people out here called the Tenement Housing Act of 1901, which banned construction of poorly ventilated tenement buildings. And they did a lot of other stuff too, folks. It made it where if you charge rent, you have to have a toilet. You have to have plumbing, right? If you charge rent, you have to have a window in every room so that way people can get fresh air. And fire escapes on the outside of buildings. That was all added with the Tenement Housing Act of 1901. All right, around 1900, U.S. lawmakers addressed living conditions of immigrants in large cities by passing the Tenement Housing Act of 1901. Okay?